we've not done enough to end the stigma of mental health.
This guest hopes to break down that stigma and giving men some confidence, really. So my name's Danny Gray. I'm the founder of a male cosmetic brand called War Paint for Men, which is a brand designed specifically for a male audience.
Two former Norwich City footballers have been speaking about how depression has affected their lives.
One day you loved, the next day you hated.
I'm Darren Eddy, former Premier League footballer representing Norwich City. The first part of the 4-part series we're doing, challenging stigmas and stereotypes around mental health. Big first guest today, big first guest. We won't tell you who it is, but this is a guy who's renowned for his work within mental health, and he's a big Norwich City fan, so I'm absolutely buzzing about it, mate.
How are you doing?
Nice to know. I'm afraid it's not. It's very good to see you there. How are you?
Very well. Nice to meet you. We're all set up down here.
Right, absolutely. You tell me what I need to do. Boss me about. I'm quite happy. Yes. Excellent.
In terms of Norwich, let's just talk about that briefly because we have to. So how long have you been, just for everyone, how long have you been a fan? Like, how long have you been involved in Norwich?
Well, I grew up in Norfolk, so of course, that one of the glories of Norwich is it's a kind of club that has a catchment area that is not threatened by any other club. We've got Peterborough and Cambridge, and I believe there's a club in Suffolk. I can't remember what it's called, but So it's a very special place in the county. When Delia joined as a chief shareholder and rescued the club in so many ways, of course, I remember that I think it was a game against Fulham, one of the very first games when Delia's name was announced, and the Fulham crowd were pointing at us. This was down in the cottage. I have a lot of friends who are Fulham fans, so I'd gone to see the game in London, and they pointed at our end and just shouted, sun-dried tomatoes. What's that about?
Who come up with that one?
I don't know. It was like sun-dried. And then there was obviously...
As well.
And then they got slightly wittier. Who baked all the pies? Obviously was the good one. And then Delia had her marvellous moment against Manchester City, which we will never forget. But, that gave Norwich a sort of, I think, an understanding that we can be a club that takes up causes and aligns itself in areas that other clubs might not, and we won't lose any of our quality and our distinctiveness. We will only enhance it. It's that kind of club. It's friendly, it's quirky. It's like the surrounding county. It's slightly quirky, slightly that do different. And that's what we love about it.
Thanks for joining us. Danny's obviously here kind of representing the brand of War Paint and what they do. I'm here on behalf of the mighty Norwich City, of course. And it's not about that. It's about challenging these stigmas and stereotypes that go along with mental health. And we know you're a huge advocate for that. But in terms of your brand as well, then, you've chucked yourself in the lion's den. Partnering up with a football club, your stereotypical kind of homophobia, racism, all these kind of questions that are being thrown and stigmatized at football. That was a big challenge for you as a brand to step into this arena because you knew you were going to get pelters from it.
Yeah, look, to be honest, I knew we were going to get that. So when I founded the brand and started the brand, I knew we would get backlash, but I didn't realise how much. Yeah. So in terms of when we did go viral, it was unbelievable. We got huge press attention, but very, very negative. And for me, the first time that happened, I can remember I was at my sister's her birthday party, and the girl who worked for me called me up and said, "Well, we're going viral." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, we're going viral on Twitter, but in a negative sense." And I see the feeling comes over you, and the next day I go in, the phone's off the hook with all the press, and it's all about toxic masculinity. But that had to happen, right? At that point, because before then, no one in the press had talked about men's makeup. It would never been written about. All of a sudden, everyone, literally, I think we were in 500 press articles, who wrote about men's makeup to some extent. Off the back of that, we've then been in the media quite a lot, which has been very positive. It's changed. But for me to do something like this with Norwich, I've always wanted to do something in football. First of all, Norwich approached me to do something. They see what we're doing. And I always thought about doing something in football, but how much Norwich have done was a massive thing for me because everything with Justin Fashanu about first great gay pride flag. But the point of that story is that we went through a world of pain. But after that, it got people talking about it, and now the perception's changing. Like we're in articles all the time. It's positive. Yeah. So my point is, when you talk about homophobia, for me, this is a massive point around how many Premiership footballers are there. 800, 1,000. There's never been one openly gay
I know, that's
player.
an extraordinary thing, isn't it?
But for me, that's because the one person, there is going to be out there, without by stats, or there is going to be one, at least that is. But it needs to be that first person who makes that plunge, because they are going to get pelters. But I promise, like we have, they'll change perception.
It's a horrible phrase that's used a lot, toxic masculinity, which is used in all kinds of silly ways. But there is no question that one of the problems of being born with Y chromosomes being male is that there's a lot of expectation. And if you're not like me in the arts world and, out gay and all that sort of thing, if you're an average kind of guy who has feelings and has anxieties and has fears, it's much harder to demonstrate them. And it has always been the case. And we make a big mistake if we think that somehow it's new to be emotional. And we're sort of encouraged to believe that maybe we're just a generation of snowflakes who don't have what the older generation had. But that's, excuse the phrase, because humans have always been the way we all are. Full of fear, full of a feeling that we are the weak one. That everyone else has got a big club behind their back and all we've got is a little cotton bud, But actually, we're all, as the poet Auden said, we're all frightened children lost in a wood, trying to be happy and trying to be good. And we fail and we let ourselves down, and when we fall off to sleep, we think, oh, God, I'm such a tit. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? Why can't I be like, we're all like that. Without exception. Think of your most heroic hero. He's like that, or she's like that. She's just as scared and just as uncertain and just as looking for confidence and encouragement as anybody else. And the answer is to know this about yourself and to know this about other people. It's a great relief, don't you think?
Absolutely. It was for me. It was recognising the issue I had and others were suffering from it, because there was always that stereotype. When I first spoke about it, I had the cliches of, you're a footballer, what have you got to be worried about? And then, Danny's talked about his body dysmorphia. And I first met Danny, I'm like, well, he's a good looking guy. How can he be worried about body dysmorphia? Yeah. But it's not about that, is it? It's how you perceive yourself. Yeah. And that for me was realising the issues I had. And then it got to a point where Gary Speed took his life. And that for me was a big kicker for me, because it was like, Gary Speed must have felt like I felt to a certain point. Then he got to the point he got to take his own life. When am I going to get like that? So for me, it was about them. I need to get some help and get the help now, and which I did, thankfully.
That's great, because for me, I think we just need tools to help deal with it. I think mental health is, it's a big word and it covers a lot of things. People think mental health is you have something wrong with you. Mental health for me is mental health is how healthy your mind is. Yeah. But I've used tools all my life to deal with things. So, and I'm a firm believer in that, whether it be makeup, any other product. So I've had a hair transplant and I didn't need one, but it made me feel better. Yeah. And that for me is really important about, you take an Anadin when you have a headache. It doesn't fix the problem, but it masks and helps you deal with it. Yeah. And I think a lot of the time people were saying about certain products or guys, you shouldn't have to use anything. Like having a hair transplant, is ridiculous. But for me, if it's going to make you feel better, that's all I want to do with this brand, this partnership. Everything you do is just get it out there that use tools that make you feel better and make you become the real you and deal with it. And without, like, you'll think it's ridiculous, but before you turned up, I, my hair wasn't right. Okay, so hair's a big thing for me. So I went over to Morrison's just now and I bought a razor, electric razor, and I just cut my own hair upstairs. But the thing is, like, just before that, I've been thinking about it all day, just because these bits weren't done properly. So I went and bought a razor. I've cut it upstairs in 5 minutes, and it's a weight off my shoulders. So what's your thoughts around people being able to use tools, or do you have anything you?
No, I think you're right. I mean, in terms of mental health treatment, there is, you've probably heard of cognitive behavioural therapy, and that is exactly about that, is about finding practical, simple tools for behaviour and ways of dealing with things. It's not long-term psychoanalysis, it's not psychiatry with drugs and treatments of that kind. It's just ways of overcoming particular anxieties by managing your problem, and very often something like taking control of how you physically look or physically feel can have a huge effect on how you mentally feel. Other ways of doing it, set myself tests of what I've got to get done. And it couldn't be just things like housework these days, because we're all doing housework. To some extent, I love cooking, but I try and be very particular about things.
It makes you feel better.
Yeah, exactly. Without getting OCD about it, I like to just organise myself and show that I'm taking control over my environment.
But even the point of I look forward to the start of a season when I was playing football as to what the new football kit would like for the season. If I'd feel good in it, if I like to wear it, because back in the 90s, I'm sure when you used to go, every kit was the same size. I mean, I wore the same size kit as Rob Newman was wearing, triple XL, and I'm like,
you're still quick as well, Dan. To be fair,
I'd have been even quicker. I'd have been even quicker if I didn't have the wind resistance and the kit's hanging down. But again, that was about how I looked and how I felt before I went on the football pitch. That actually had an influence sometimes of how I played.
I think it would scare people, the amount of men who reach out to us, and me personally, since I've started this brand, about their own insecurities and talking about it. So
and people as well. The amount of people I knew actually then come and talk to me about their mental health, which I'd known for years that had never talked about it, but they'd suffered as well. So they were suffering in silence. And what your point, Stephen? When, you've obviously talked about your bipolar quite openly from the start. What age were you when you kind of thought, I need to get the help, or I need to talk about it? Because you were kind of at the forefront of it, really. And I have to say, I had a bit of a fan out when you were coming today, because QI, Blackadder goes forth. Honestly, you were kind of forefront in making all this start and happen. Really, you may not kind of see it like that, but I think for me, it certainly helped.
Well, I mean, I had gone through a lot of nonsense and unhappiness in my life without ever really connecting it to something as clear-cut as a mental health issue. As a teenager, I had a very stormy adolescence. I was expelled from a lot of schools. I ended up going to prison when I was 17, 18, and so I had to turn my life around before going to university, and that did help. And my parents had sent me to a psychiatrist when I was 15, and you would just thought of he's a baron, or he's tempestuous, or he's a bad influence, or there was no such thing as attention deficit disorder and all that kind of thing. It was. I'm sure I would have been diagnosed with that one, because I couldn't keep still, and I couldn't focus, and I was always a distraction in the classroom, and I was kind of unhappy, and no one could understand why. And it wasn't really till my 30s that I realised that something was very wrong, because I had everything that I could ever have wanted. I'd been so lucky. I'd achieved things in TV and in writing, and I'd made enough money to be very successful and not to have to work again if I didn't want to, really. And yet, I just inside me there was this awful misery and pain, actually. And of course, if you're not in any way diagnosed with some illness, you just reach out to anything that will still your misplaced energy, or your hypermania, or indeed numb your pain. And those, of course, are alcohol and drugs, because they're around and they sort of work for a time. Yeah. Of course, underneath it, things get worse and worse and worse and worse, and then you get to a crisis, and that's what happened with me. I was in a play, and I ran away. I left. I took a car, went to Europe, and disappeared. Tried to hide, and it all got a total mess and very silly. But it allowed me then to get a diagnosis, and that's when I thought and approached the BBC and said, look, that there are so many people like me with this problem, this bipolar disorder, for example. And it's never talked about, and it ought to be. And so I made this program, and it did make a lot of difference, it seemed. It was very, I suppose you'd call it good timing. The nation was ready for some kind of conversation. And many people like you and those in sport, and in particular, because it is a male problem, suicide more than a female problem, though it's not to say it isn't a female problem. It just so happens that young men are the most vulnerable to taking their own lives. It is an urgent thing to talk about, because it is an urgent issue. And heaven knows how much more urgent it is now under COVID, as more and more people are blanketed away from any kind of social connection and any sense of being able to share their problems and to laugh, and all the things that are healthy in terms of our nature as social colonizing beings. That's what we are. We're ants. We're not tigers. We live in colonies. We enriched and strengthened by our connection with others.
And how have you coped with that then during isolation? Because for me, it's been really difficult. I live on my own, so locked away. I was on furlough from work. There was no football to watch. Yeah. So for like literally 3 or 4 months, I was getting an hour's exercise a day, and that was it. I was then locking myself way back in my house again. So for me, I found it terribly difficult. I was speaking to family members and trying to do as much as you can. But I always remember playing at places like Old Trafford in front of 75,000 people, and you're running out and playing your football, and they can all be cheering your name. But I'll remember the one that called me. And that will sit with me for days and days, thinking, why did he say that? Why did he feel that way about me? So I think as a species, we want to please everybody.
And the same with press, I bet.
Yeah, exactly
the one who said that you had an off game, or you were lazy,
gave you a
or
6
something.
out of 10.
You never forget that.
Never got a 6.
Yeah,
never a 6.
I've often thought, how do we overcome that particular quality? I call it the swimming pool issue, and I apply it to social media as well. Is that if you think of Twitter being a swimming pool, the water is 99% crystal clear and lovely to swim in, but there will be the odd turd.
Yeah.
And no one is going to get into a swimming pool if they see a turd in it, even though, it's no good saying, but the rest of the water's fine. You say, no thanks, I'm not getting in there. And it's the same with social media. It just takes that one poisonous remark.
And everyone jumps on it.
Absolutely, to ruin the whole pool and to ruin the benefit you might get. And it doesn't matter how many people say it's great. You can even win an award. It just takes one person saying, yeah, totally overrated. Absolutely.
So how have you learned to deal with that over the years then? Because, you've won numerous awards. Do you kind of look back to those on the mantelpiece and think, look at what I've done? Or do you still remember those comments?
My awards room. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry.
Very organised.
The awards wing, I think, is not the annex.
Yeah.
No, the fact is I've never mastered it. So the only thing is the old phrase, what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. And I just don't look. I don't read any parts of newspapers that are likely to mention me, if I've done something. I don't read reviews of books or performances. I simply don't. And when it comes to Twitter, I only post. If you think of it as like an old school notice board, I run up and pin the notice on and then run away before I don't want to see anybody reading it. I don't want to hear.
Yeah, but that also comes with experience, doesn't it? But when you're a younger generation, particularly with footballers, you're sitting on a coach on the way home from an away match and you naturally post something. You're going to sit there. So how difficult it is particularly for younger minds to step away from that, particularly in the generation it is now, because they are led by what goes on their phones.
That's absolutely right. It is very, very difficult. And I think, though, one shouldn't underestimate the wisdom of the average person. Most, not just the wisdom, but also the good nature. Most people are very forgiving and very understanding and are not bullies, It's only the anonymous ones, and they don't count. And what I think matters in football and in all sport is a thing that has changed hugely in a very, really short time, and that is the atmosphere in the dressing rooms, in the changing rooms. If you look back and listen to stories of the practical jokes played by Gascoigne on people, I'm sure you can. And, there'll always be banter and lightheartedness, and there'll always be language used that you wouldn't repeat to your grandmother, unquestionably. A sporting environment is a place of high intensity. But I think in terms of racism and homophobia, things are immeasurably improved. Not to say perfect, of course, but much better. They're much more grown up. And I think there's a recognition that courage, bravery, which is supposedly a manly quality, comes from people who admit their flaws. There's nothing brave about saying, I am very strong and fast and I'm good at football. That's just boasting. It's not brave. But brave is saying, I have weaknesses. I'm afraid of this. I'm scared of that, or I have a secret, life, and all that's courage.
You talk about being brave. That's what we've done as a brand, and partnering with something like Norwich. We got not pelters, but we got a lot of positive press about it. But then people saying, "Oh, we play like women, we're going to look like women," or it's for gays, and it's still going to have that. But what do you think about that?
I think it's worth having the long view, and it's annoying that things don't happen more quickly than we'd like them to, but they do happen. You know, the old cliche about the arc of history, the arrow of history bends towards progress and truth and justice. But it's a slow arc, you know. What's clear is if you look back at all the big issues in terms of social justice and equality, the attitudes of 10, 20 years ago now look ridiculous. Yeah. You can't believe. You think, did people really talk like that?
And even some of the TV programs you watch.
Yeah, it's astonishing. Yeah. And things do get better. But you have to keep pressing at it. And personally, I think it doesn't help to be too angry about it, to shake fists, because it just alienates the very people you most want to in the jargon, you want to give people permission to accept small changes. Yeah.
Is that pleased you? How much do you talk about how slow it has been? But actually, in your lifetime, there's been an awful lot of change. You know, just talking 20, 30 years ago. So it does show you in another 20, 30 years where we could be.
Yes,
but we're part of that, of what we're trying to do. Not me, and this is what my
you are. Yeah.
And this is what my big thing is, and I totally agree when you're saying you'll get the noise this end, but what I saw when we did go viral, the other side of it, we had so many private messages from people saying, I think it's amazing what you're doing, and that's what you concentrate on. You know, those people that, by opening this up, it is helping them in a way, and it is a much longer road, but hopefully, you know, compared to where we were 5, 10 years ago, men didn't even wear deodorant, you know, or 20 years ago. So to compare where we are today is incredible. And thanks to Norwich as well, by the way, because with a club like this to do something that we're doing is I can't believe it.
The way things have moved on has been fantastic, and particularly the last 5 years, I think, in terms of mental health. But for me, there's still areas that need massive improvement. Not just everybody's talking, brilliant. You know, men are talking, everybody's talking. We're sort of, you know, all communicating together and let people know. But for me, there's still a lot of where do they go next. There's still not enough of out there the help that's needed. Essentially, is it the same? Do you feel similar to that?
I think that's right. But there are. You know,
is it because people don't know what the help should be?
And more than anything, it's about understanding that there are hundreds of thousands of frightened and lonely people out there who really are unhappy or worried about themselves and their standing amongst their friends and about their ability to respect themselves in one way or another, either because of their sexuality or their gender issues or their mental health issues or their sense of their self and their appearance or their, you know, all kinds of things that make them deeply anxious and unhappy. And there are ways of making sure that society can give them a boost and can allow them to know that they're not alone, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of in being afraid, that's the normal case if you're a human being.
But then how do you get past that point? Because I've had it when I talked about my mental health, people were saying it's okay for you to come out and talk about it because you're Darren Eady, you play football, so, you know, I'm the average man in the street, they talk about, and how difficult it is for them because of work and perceptions. So, you know, that's a difficult sell, essentially. You know, it's okay for you, you can talk about it.
So I think it's about giving people a choice, though. I think it's always a choice. You have a choice to do whatever you want in terms of sexuality. That's what I think. I've heard some of your talks before, Stephen, around you having that option to do what you want to do to make yourself feel comfortable. If it is come out as gay or trans or whatever, or use or be a certain way, I feel it's about having a choice to be able to feel insecure, to be able to feel like you have mental health. You know, a choice for a guy. I think a lot of the time people, as a guy, you don't feel you have that option that I can talk about it or I can be this way.
I think that's still ingrained, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it's about giving people a choice, and I think once you have an option, I think that really helps up front. Like for me, I'll go back to my hair, but this is like an analogy. Without, you know, I wasn't losing my hair. Right. It was ridiculous. But for me, every minute of every day for 2 years, it ruled my life. Every single minute. But there was an option. There's not always an option, but there was an option for me to have a hair transplant. But I've got this longer term issue here. But for that point, for me to know there was an option, which I didn't know there was before, made me feel better. You know, that I could have that option. But this is what I'm saying. I think it's all about letting people have that option to do whatever you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone or not breaking the law. That makes you feel the real you. Because a lot of this time, you're not doing it for anyone else. Yeah. You're doing it for yourself, aren't you?
Well, and everybody's different as well. I think, particularly when I came out and spoke about it in the first instance, you know, people said go and speak to, you know, the professionals, the Samaritans, which are all fantastic. For me, I didn't want to talk to someone like that. I wanted to speak to someone who understood from my point of view, what I'd gone through without. I felt like I was being judged if I'd spoke to someone like that, which was a terrible thing to feel. I just needed someone to go, no, I get it.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a psychiatrist?
Yes. Oh, yes. Good heavens, yes. Yeah, I think they saved my life actually at one particular point. I've seen therapists and psychiatrists and all kinds of things. I mean, in the end, a lot of it is talking to yourself, and that you're the hardest person to talk to sometimes. And some people keep a mood diary. Some people speak into their microphone on their phone or whatever, in order just to lay out how they're feeling even to an echo chamber, into a blank cave, just to say the words out loud that you're usually afraid to say out loud can be a very, very big step. It is, of course, so obvious when you think about it that even something like alcohol, which is a very simple chemical, essentially, we've all had the experience where we sit with a friend and we drink exactly the same amount, the same number of pints, the same number of glasses of exactly the same wine, and you will feel like a bit tired or something, and your friend, who you know is unfortunately that kind of person, goes violent or rude to waiters or picks a fight and repeats themselves and becomes a bloody bore. And they've had exactly the same chemical. Yeah. So imagine, therefore, how different it is when it's a complex chemical, like an antipsychotic or all kinds of different antidepressants and things. How it's no wonder it takes time to discover whether this drug suits you. And similarly, whether it's not a drug, but just an approach, a form of behavior of the therapy or of ways of changing your life, they're not going to suit the same people in the same way. We are all, this is the paradox, we're all so different and we're all so the same. Yeah. We all share so much emotionally and so much in terms of our life experience, and yet we're also very, very different.
I mean, that's a really good message, isn't it? Because it's about sticking with it, whatever it is.
That's it.
There is chemicals and tablets that won't be right for one, be right for another, but you've got to persist because there's no quick fix.
No, there isn't.
No, we know that. But once you get a little bit more experienced at it and you get a little bit older, you do learn to deal with it.
Everyone talks about, you need to talk about it, which I totally agree. And when you talk about it, you start to feel better. But I think there's that whole thing about, it's not just about talking about it. It's about medication. It's about seeing a psychiatrist. It's always that first step.
Yeah.
That's always the hardest of anything, isn't it? Admitting you've got a problem. And I think, I'm talking about a problem, but I'm talking about anyone with any sort of problem, whatever it is, it's that first step that is always the hardest to get over. And once you do that, you try different things and you learn to deal with it. And mental health for me I'm never going to cure myself. I think it's here for me. I think for everyone, it's there with life. It's just about how you manage it.
Yeah, it's what doctors call chronic, like asthma or diabetes. These are not things that go away. It's how you manage them. You manage your asthma, you manage your diabetes, you manage your mental health issues, your disorders.
Exactly, and as long as you know you're going to have those dark places like you said, but you've got a way to manage your way out.
I mean, I'm president of the mental health charity Mind, and obviously one of the things we want people to do is to explore everything that's out there, all the tools, as you say, which can be varied, and to realise that everybody's different. So I want to thank you, of course, for your connection with the club and for opening our eyes to all those issues you've talked about, and of course Darren, we've always wanted to thank for being such a hero of the club, but also for being so brave. And brave, of course, is a good word, because what did braves wear?
Yellow.
War paint.
You teed that up for me.
Yeah.
I airshot it.
I missed it.
Absolutely airshot it.
Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure. And anybody who's watching, if we can help out, then just one person today, that would be fantastic. But there's lots of information on the bottom of your screens to get in touch.
Yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. Ever.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Stephen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.